Welcome, everyone. I am John Coonrod. I am a coordinator of the Movement for Community-Led Development, and I want to welcome everyone here to this special call with our friends from USAID on the new local capacity strengthening policy. We're really pleased that you could be with us today. I want to let you know, if you are a French speaker, that at the bottom of your screen, you will see a little globe that is how you get live interpretation from Dr. Paul-Marie Houssou, who's with us today for French translation. As I mentioned, we will have a special discussion, and I will give you a short introduction of the Movement for Community-Led Development for people who are new to the movement. So this movement was launched in 2015 at the Sustainable Development Summit. Many of us had been pushing the UN system to include communities in the Sustainable Development Goals, and they did. So at the United Nations, we launched this movement. Today, it has more than 1,500 community-based organizations across 17 national chapters and more than 70 international NGOs that are members of the movement. We have 5 goals in this movement. Number 1 is voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups. The second is that there should be adequate share, a fair share of the public budget at the community level, which is about 20%. Communities need at least 20%. In rich countries, it's typically 40 or 50%, yet in so many of the lowest income countries, it's only a small amount of public budgets that reach the community level. The third is good local governance, transparency, effectiveness, democratic processes, social accountability. If those things come together, people can demand their fundamental right to quality public services. And finally, resilience. It's critical that communities have the information and resources they need to build resilience to shocks. Resilience is fundamentally a community level attribute. This is our theory of change. The action in the movement is fundamentally in the national chapters, where members form partnerships for advocacy with their own government to push for greater decentralization and devolution of resources, and also facilitation partnerships to bring the process of community-led development to large scale, so that more and more healthy, productive, resilient, self-reliant communities are there, demonstrating how communities can successfully achieve the Sustainable Development Goals when they have the resources, the facilitation to do so. So what we want is this kind of convergence between better policies and more facilitation, so that the whole ecosystem for community-led development is stronger. That is how we believe the SDGs can be achieved. We have marvelous regional coordinators who are there to support the national chapters: Pascal in Benin, Roland's in Southern Africa, Daisy in Eastern Africa, and Diana in Latin America and the Caribbean. We also have a lot of participants in Asia and Europe. So welcome, everyone. And with that, I want to pass it to my colleague, Gunjan, who will introduce today's special program. Gunjan?
Thanks, John. Hello, everyone. It is absolutely a pleasure to be here and very excited about today's session for a number of reasons. One, because it's on USAID's new local capacity strengthening policy, and we all know how much in the movement of the importance we place on local capacity strengthening. It's one of the 3 pillars of our umbrella strategy for the national chapters. So it is something that is extremely important for us in the movement, but also for a couple of other reasons. We all know that there are policies which are made, which impact all of us, especially people in the majority world, and local organizations and CBOs in the majority world. And very seldom do we get a chance to be a part of those policies. Very seldom are inputs from CBOs and local organizations taken to create these policies. They are often made in, Geneva, Washington, wherever the power center is, with sometimes inputs from INGOs and others, but really not from local actors. I think that's what makes policy so different, is that USAID last year, many of you were perhaps there for the session that we had in December last year, when the draft local capacity, at that point, development policy came out, and we had the same team from USAID here asking for feedback and to make sure that local voices, community-based organizations, and their inputs were a part of this policy. So I think that was a departure. That's not how policies are normally made. And we were very excited that there was this effort to actually reach out to local organizations and CBOs to get the input. But I think what's even more important is that so many times, and I've heard a lot of you say to me, well, yeah, what's the point of doing all of this, right? Like, yes, we are called into meetings. Yes, we are called to give inputs. It's a formality. Nobody ever listens. We don't know what happens. We submit. That's the end of the story. So the reason I'm so excited about today's call is that this is really closing that feedback loop. Yes, all of you spent a lot of time and effort in submitting feedback on the local capacity development policy draft that came out. And this is our chance to hear from the USAID team of what happened with that feedback. How much of it went into the policy, what could not be brought in, and why. And just from the CLD lens, I know all of you will agree that that is so important. If we talk of equitable partnerships, which is an important aspect of this policy as well, you cannot have it without respecting the time and the effort and the resources that partners bring input into this. So without further ado, I want to welcome the team from USAID for being with us and, for coming back. Colleen and Arjun, welcome back. We have with us from USAID, Colleen Brady and Arjun Tasker, who will be taking us through the section today and sorry about that. And sharing with us how this policy has really evolved, and what changes have been there in this. Arjun Tasker is the new Partnership Initiative Portfolio Manager, and Colleen Brady is the Senior Monitoring Evaluation and Learning Specialist from the Local Faith and Transformative Partnership Hub at USAID. They have both been very integrally involved in collating feedback, in drafting the policy, and they are joined by their colleagues, Tom Wilson and Omar. So, Arjun and Colleen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gunjan. It is a pleasure to be here as always. I cannot tell you how much we appreciated the workshop that MCLD pulled together with all of you, with MCLD's membership to inform the policy. Made a huge difference, and we'll touch on that. And we're really proud of this policy. I think the process we undertook was, in terms of U.S. government-led policy development work, some of the best I have ever seen. And actually, that credit for that really goes to Colleen, who made an incredible effort to ensure that the comments we received from all over the world, from literally thousands of people, were integrated into this policy. Next slide, please, Tom. As we get started, I do need to do our usual caveat that, I am not a representative of USAID. I can provide you with my perspective, our perspective in pulling together this policy, what we learned, but there are individual views. Today, we are grateful to MCLD and Gunjan for planning this, giving us a really big chunk of time, but I don't like to spend everyone's time with us talking at you. So we'll do a presentation here where we go through the policies updates, how we integrated comments, what we've done in launching the policy, some of our next steps to try to make the policy real. And then move into a breakout group discussion. It'll be 4 breakout rooms, 2 in French and 2 in English, where we will touch a little bit on that key point of how do we go about making, living out what is written in the policy. Next slide, please. I think just a little context on the development of the policy. Honestly, we probably started working on the policy in 2019 even, but really were able to pull everything together in the summer and fall of 2020 and start doing the work needed to even begin to produce our first draft. And actually it was during the internal and external comment period that I think MCLD held their workshop, so a little bit further along in this timeline. Once we had a complete draft, that and I think for those of you who attended, you'll note that the policy looks very different now in a number of ways. But we were really excited that it was signed. It was signed about a week before our launch event on October 19th, which you can imagine was very stressful because we certainly had to plan the event even though we didn't have a policy yet. The administrator hadn't signed it, but we needed to believe that it was going to be signed, that we would have a policy, and in the end, that belief was upheld. Next slide, please. I think with this, I'll actually turn it over to Colleen, who, as I said, knows everything about this because she led this entire process. Colleen.
Thanks, Arjun. And there's a lot of shared credit that should go out to our broader team as well. Many folks were involved, but I just wanted to share a bit more about what the drafting, consultation, and public comment period looked like for this policy. So it was developed, like Arjun said, over 3 years through a highly participatory process. It involved 11 local actor focus groups early on, nearly 400 individuals consulted from around the world, and really consulting across the full spectrum of USAID programming sectors and the humanitarian development nexus. The agency provided a 10-week public comment period, which is much longer than the typical public comment period, in recognition of the diverse and the deep interest in the policy from all types of USAID partners, so we could really hear from you. This generated 276 total comments from 265 unique respondents, as well as a bevy of papers, which were well beyond what could fit into the comment box on our website. And that included a paper from MCLD, which we really appreciated. And so what we did was we took all of that information together and we conducted a qualitative analysis of it. And Tom, you can jump to the next slide. So here is what we learned. So with all of these internal and external comments, we had over 600 pages of input on the policy. And we looked at that and did a lot of analysis. For those of you who are Mel nerds like me, I'll give a little bit of detail. So we looked both at comments related to specific principles, specific sections of the policies, things like line edits and recommendations that were very specific to certain sections. And we use those to really look into those specific areas and make revisions. We also looked at cross-cutting themes that weren't specific to a certain paragraph or principle, but really cut across the entire policy and required more extensive revisions and changes. What we did was we qualitatively coded those, and we identified 4 large cross-cutting themes that had a variety of sub-themes under it. These large themes involved the importance of strengthening capacities, not building capacities, not developing capacities, but really recognizing existing assets in communities and strengthening those. We also heard a lot of interest around the importance of supporting equitable partnerships. So considering power imbalances, considering the role of donors in this whole equation, and making sure the policy addressed that as well. We heard a lot of confusion, frankly, around roles in the policy, and a lot of folks saying, what is my role? Where am I in this? And so we tried to make that much more explicit in our revisions. And finally, we heard a lot of questions around operationalizing the policy. Comments like, this is great in theory, how will this look in practice? And that is something that we sought to address through our implementation section of the policy, which underwent serious and considerable revisions. And it's also something that we are looking to continue to work on as we move towards implementing the policy. Arjun will speak a bit more to that later. And we can jump to the next slide. This is by no means representative of all of the comments we heard from you all at MCLD, but I just wanted to sort of map at a high level some of the key feedback that you shared with us and how we saw that feedback fitting into these bigger themes. And I thought I might also speak a bit to the changes that we made based on what we heard from you and from others. So on the strengthening capacity side and recognizing assets that already exist, we changed the name of the policy. We changed how we talked about capacity strengthening, not development, throughout the entire policy. And we really tried to emphasize a more locally led approaches that recognize existing assets. On supporting equitable partnerships, we heard from both your group and others about the need to acknowledge and address the power dynamics inherent in USAID's engagement with local actors. And the updated policy does a lot more to really acknowledge these power imbalances, the time investment partners must make to engage in USAID programs, and it does things like recognize how assessments might place particularly high burdens on local partners and how these can be more streamlined moving forward. We also made discussions of power imbalances and power dynamics much more explicit in a lot of our principles. For the understanding roles, with a lot of that confusion of where am I in this system, we actually, Tom did this. Tom led a really helpful visualization in the policy that outlines who these actors are, what their roles are, and makes it clear that these are interrelated and complementary and might evolve over time. And so I do recommend you check out that section of the policy because I think it is much more helpful. Finally, we heard a lot of comments about operationalizing the policy from you all, from others, about how it's important to develop clear implementation guidance in consultation with community stakeholders. And that is something we're looking forward to doing moving forward. So the policy now directs the Policy Advisory Council to coordinate a comprehensive effort that will prioritize accountability to local actors and stakeholders and ensure adequate resources are dedicated to experimentation, innovation, and best fit practices in local capacity strengthening. And with that, I will turn it back over to Arjun, who will share a bit more about this policy. Arjun, you're on mute.
I was on mute. Thank you very much, Colleen. I think there's just a few more things I'd like to just touch on about this policy. But one thing I do want to say is that the policy is currently only available in English, and we apologize for that. We ran out of those two important resources, money and time. We were able to translate, of course, our 2-pager, and the policy will be translated into Spanish, French, and Arabic over the course of the next couple months. And we will let MCLD know when there are updated versions. But in light of that, we'll run through. I also don't expect everyone to have read the policy yet. It only came out, a few days ago. So we'll do a little bit of a description here of what's in there. Next slide, please. I think one of the, Colleen highlighted that we changed it to strengthening. One of the key things about this policy was that everyone even within USAID, never mind in the whole international development space, uses these terms slightly differently and to mean different things. The one thing I would want to highlight about these definitions, in particular the definition of local actor, is that the definitions here are talking about what we mean in the policy. Now, USAID doesn't define capacity anywhere else, so this would be the definition, but we talk about local actors very differently, for instance, in the private sector engagement policy and the youth policy and this policy. And so I did just want to highlight that because, of course, with localization being such a large component of what the agency is doing right now, it's an important thing to flag that you might, different USAID people might talk about local actors slightly differently. Next slide, please. When we launched the policy, we did this big event. We were really grateful to have Deputy Administrator Paloma Adams-Allen speak. She provided some keynote remarks. We had a really excellent panel sort of touching on some of the different features of the policy and sharing their experience. And the YouTube link, we can share that around in notes perhaps as well, is live, and you can see the event, the recording of the event. And I think there is actually some really interesting stuff in there. Next slide. Most important part of the policy. I think one thing we don't usually do is explain why we did a principles-based policy. And I think that's really worth touching on, because what we usually say is that, hey, the policy has to operate across all these different contexts, and you might do this kind of work very differently in humanitarian assistance in the Sahel versus, the Northern Triangle versus countries in Asia, with that, each of which may have specific context, and the way you think about capacity strengthening might be different there when you get into specifics. And so we wanted to think about principles for doing this well, because principles are not rules, nor are they values. And so principles are much more flexible than rules, but aren't so prescriptive. And unlike a value statement, principles are still action oriented. They still have a verb that says, do something. And so we can use principles to translate values like, integrity and respect into actions, and in this case, actions for how we might do capacity strengthening better. The other thing I just want to say about this is, because it will lead us into our discussion, is we slightly updated the principles and changed the order and created this separation of principles for effective programming and principles for partnerships in capacity strengthening based on feedback. That was something that I think people found confusing, and it, I think, clarifies in the policy what we mean, because these are important and interrelated, but they do sort of touch on two distinct and equally important priorities, I suppose, when you are thinking about capacity strengthening work. Both the way you might design that work mechanically and in terms of choosing where to spend energy and time, and how to go about it in ways that are respectful and characterized by sort of mutual accountability. Next slide. We are looking at a long-term implementation plan. And we are building an implementation team here within the agency. Some of our first steps is not even to write implementation guidance, but to describe for our colleagues what implementation guidance might look like. I think that there's a couple of different key things to think about when you are trying to do a longer term change effort in a big institution. You need a sense of urgency. You need a coalition within the agency that's willing to push for the change. We have a strategic vision to a certain extent, and we have champions within the agency, but we need to look at some of the barriers to sort of effectively implementing the policy. We need to find our short-term wins and then look at how we get to bigger change, and most importantly, figure out how we institutionalize change. So the whole agency, whenever they think about capacity strengthening, thinks about it in a way that aligns with these principles. And I think one of our next challenges is trying to think through, you know, what that looks like on the ground. If a you know, a colleague in a mission is working with local partners on an activity, and it is clear that capacity strengthening needs to be either part of that activity or something that's brought to the activity. There are ways to even come to that conclusion, never mind how you go about it after, that align with the principles. And I think we have to start making that clear and providing examples for our colleagues. Next slide, please. And to that end, we will move into a discussion. I want to thank you all. We perhaps hold questions to the end and discuss, move into breakouts where we hope to ask you, exactly those questions. What would these principles look like in practice? What do they look like in practice where you have seen them in your experience? What advice would you give to USAID? Would you give to other international actors, like maybe INGOs? What would you give to yourselves and your colleagues and local partners of different types? What advice would you give to put these principles into practice? And we hope to listen to this discussion and take notes and bring what we hear to the implementation team as they start to stand up and figure out how they can help the agency put these principles into practice. Gunjan, should I turn it back to you perhaps? I don't know if there are instructions for returning to breakouts.
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. So, and we're going to do the question and answer after the breakouts, you said?
It's up to you. We could pause our questions now, or we want to take a few questions now, and then do breakouts and then questions. We're flexible. It's your meeting.
Unless people have pressing questions now, we can go into the breakouts, because each of the breakout rooms is actually going to have somebody from USAID in there facilitating. So we can see if you have more questions when we come back, we can take them there. But for now, we will have the breakout groups. There are 4 breakout groups. They're self-selecting. We have 2 in English and 2 in French. You can either choose to be in the breakout groups that discusses principles 1 to 3, which are the principles for effective programming, or you can select the breakout groups that are for principles 4 to 7, which are for equitable partnerships in both languages. So the French ones will have FR written in front of them. So we are just going to announce the breakout, we're just going to launch the breakout groups, and people should be able to choose it. Sorry, technology doesn't always cooperate. I thought we had the breakout groups created and just realized we don't. So, all right, they're there. So you should be able to see the breakout rooms.
I think you have to stop sharing the slides first.
Okay. Let's stop sharing the slides, and people should be able to see. Are you able to see breakout rooms?
No, you have to start the breakouts for them to appear.
Yes, we can.
I'm able to see it.
I did.
Oh, okay, good.
You should have
Okay,
received
great.
a pop-up message inviting you
It's
to join. So you'll see
Yes.
in front of the names of the breakout rooms, you'll see a join button that you can just press and join. And I see people are joining. And we have about 20 minutes for the breakout rooms. We'll be back in 20 minutes. And I'm guessing each breakout room will have somebody reporting back and sharing. So. All right, Arjun.
And then I think us co-hosts have to be pushed into them somehow, I guess.
Well, you should get a pop-out message asking you
No,
to join a
didn't.
breakout room.
Did not. Maybe it's in there. Let's see.
And you need to be a co-host to be able to.
I think you can click on more and choose breakout group, but I thought I was supposed to stay in the main
Yeah.
space. Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make you co-host so that you can guide people in case. I think you need to be a co-host to be able to.
I see there are 26 people not in breakout groups, but I can assign them. Should I do that?
Well, yeah, if you're not able to see the breakout rooms, then maybe you can just let Anne know and and I think that's a great idea. That's probably the simplest thing to do. And then Anne, should I move on? Or do you need help here?
You can go ahead. I'll keep doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm just having to guess based on people's names if they should go in the French group. Hi there, if you can hear me, you're not in a breakout room yet, I guess, and I can help you get into one, so you can let me know. If you can hear me and you need to help moving into a breakout group, just let me know.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the internet, so I'm stuck here. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Good to see you, Sotin. I'm going to, Cyril and Jacques, I'm going to add you to the French breakout groups unless I hear otherwise. Hi, Emma Grace. Would you like me to assign you to a breakout group in English or French?
In English, I had a very bad network. I even joined late.
No
I tried
problem.
to join group question 4 to 7, but then I dropped because of my network.
All right, let me try again, put you in there. Thanks for your persistence.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Prudence, if you can hear me. I tried to send you to a breakout group, but I wasn't successful. Hi there, I'm going to put you, Omar, in a breakout group that's in French, if that's okay. And James Alice, I will put you into a breakout group in English, if that's okay. Mama Soroku, I will put you in a French breakout group, if that's okay.
Ok, bonsoir.
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 Okay, you should go to a French breakout group.
Ouais. Bon, la connexion fait défaut. Bon, juste pour vous saluer. Je n'ai pas pu suivre de façon continue. Ça coupe, ça va, ça revient. Merci beaucoup pour la réunion.
Oui. You should be able to join the French breakout group. Choisissez un groupe de discussion français. Une sélection. Vous devrez pouvoir rejoindre le groupe de discussion français. Mhm.
I think everyone's just coming back. Thank you. I know there was a little bit of trouble with one of the groups. Sorry. That's like standard on Zoom calls, but I think we sorted it out eventually. So hopefully all the groups had some nice discussion. Thank you, Anne, for just redirecting everybody and putting us into groups. All right. Want to just hear back a little bit from each of the 4 groups on what you heard. Group 1, I think, was Arjun.
Yeah, honestly, it was great discussion. I think we have some good examples of, for example, different diverse approaches. Some good questions. I appreciate the honest feedback that the way in which USAID does outreach to different, especially in country, right? How can there be greater communication, because your understanding of what capacities even exist in country is going to be very different. A little bit of conversation on measuring performance, which I think was really important. And as we were closing out, Chad was asking the question of whether there are new ways to measure performance and how one can go about doing that, because even if you are practicing capacity strengthening work in a way that aligns with this policy, you may not have the tools to sort of demonstrate progress the way you wish. And that's a really good question. I don't have a good answer, but I suspect some of my colleagues have been working on that for a little while. And I think everyone at MCLD may be hearing from them in a next month. Group 2.
Thanks. I think that was Omar, right?
I was the second set of English principles, but I guess,
okay.
But it doesn't matter. We can go to whomever.
No, why don't you go ahead? You're unmuted.
Sure. So we were talking about like I said, the second set of principles 4 through 7, and had a number of interesting points come up. One said about the importance of mutual learning and respect, and even more awareness of how different groups and different cultures communicate, and that kind of being a necessary part of being able to do capacity strengthening well is understanding different forms of communication and being more aware and more sensitive to that issue of equity in terms of how overhead costs are provided for, and whether those are provided for sub-recipients, and how that makes it harder for them to be able to cover those costs and harder for them to be able to grow. Sort of seeing that as a form of what equitable partnerships should look like in capacity strengthening. There is also some interests that came up. We have 4 case studies that are up on our LCS policy landing page right now that cover different facets of capacity strengthening, but there was a point that it would be helpful to have more cases or more examples of what capacity strengthening looks like with and through marginalized groups, or whether that would be indigenous populations or whatever the case may be, that they felt like that was something that could be more clarity on. So with that, I hand it over back to you, Gunjan, or whoever the next group is.
Thanks. I think that's Amar, the first French group. Are you able to unmute?
Yep. Hey, Omar.
I don't think we.
Well, perhaps, Gunjan, we could just ask if there's someone from that group who would like to share a couple words.
Hello, I'm here. So, hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Okay. Yes, hi. So thank you so much. So I don't know if I'm gonna make the presentation in French or in English. because our group is the group. I mean, our group. We have the discussion in French. So
if you could report in English, that would be good, and then Paul Marie can translate into French.
Okay, perfect. So what come up in the group, in our group? So we work on the effective programming. So, and what come up in the group is, the importance of, starting with the down level and move to the top level. So people are talking about, improving the down top approach rather than a top down approach, because the top down approach will create the wastage of time, and it's not also efficient, and it doesn't take into account the need as well as the priority of the community. So the second things that we have discussed in the group is the importance of understanding the community, the reality of the community, the importance of understanding the role and the responsibility of each individuals, of each group within the community, and as well as the relationship between the people and the individuals within the community. The people think that this is very important. They are also talking about the identification of the targets. So the target population, especially the role of the leaders. When, for example, engaging the discussion with the community. So how we can mobilize the leaders? How should be the role of the leaders? To influence the social behavior. The community intervention. We think that this is also one important points. And the last point we have discussed is about the performance. So, and the group highlighted the importance of improving what you call the participatory approach in measuring the performance. How we can involve the community actor in the measurement of the performance. But the big issue is that usually people that have not enough skills on the process to measure this performance. So how we can put in place a system that can improve the capacity and the skills of the community to measure their performance, because at the end of the day what is important is as a donor or as a partner we cannot measure the performance how to call it, we cannot unilaterally measure the performance. So how we can jointly work with the community to measure and to monitor the performance. So that's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amar, and apologies for making you do the translation on the spot and report back in English.
Okay.
Colleen.
Sure, thanks. So my group spoke a lot about the fourth principle, aligning capacity strengthening to local priorities, and talked about how you really have to have an intentional process to first identify and define local priorities, and what is a local priority from the start. And that is not entirely obvious, right? That many INGOs don't have great local networks, especially at the rural level, that there's a real need to be on the ground and talk to communities, and that you can't just talk to a few people. You have to really go out and intentionally hear from a wide range of stakeholders, because the reality is that as soon as funding is involved, different folks will be positioning themselves and trying to influence the process. So you have to really go out, hear, facilitate this process to identify local priorities and really validate those priorities across a wide range of stakeholders. And then following that, you'll need to see what capacities already exist. A bit more on that in a bit. And then you need to see if they need to be reinforced and recognize that they don't always need to be, right? And then in terms of, see what capacities exist and appreciate and reinforce existing capacities, that fifth principle we had a really good discussion around the importance of local knowledge, around how a lot of, indigenous knowledge and local expertise may have been lost through processes of colonialization over the years. And there's an importance of bringing this back, of recognizing this, and of creating space to look to you know, a variety of sources. Let me see if I can find my list. It was a really good list of ideas. I think it was like, aha, yeah, like that there's this knowledge in proverbs, it's in songs, it's in chants, it's in culture. And so being able to really identify this expertise there and making sure we are appreciating and reinforcing it through our work. So thank you to my group. Back to you, Gunjan.
Thanks, Colleen. I wonder so that was fantastic. I hope the USAID team got some feedback to carry back with them on the translation and the implementation of the policy. I was wondering if people have any specific questions that they want to bring to the larger group here, or were you able to get your questions all addressed in the Q&A? Like I said, this was really closing the feedback loop, so it's your session. If there are questions, comments, or anything that you have for the USAID team, please raise your hands or put it in chat, unmute and speak up, and English or French, whatever language you are comfortable in. And we'll just give people a couple of minutes to think.
If you promise not to tell anybody, you're welcome to ask me questions that are sort of outside the scope of the capacity strengthening policy. I'm happy to be transparent, but we'll just keep that on the down low.
We'll stop recording, Arjun. This is an opportunity, people. You don't get this often. Paul, please unmute.
Yes, I appreciate the presentation. I was at the initial launch of this interaction between USAID and MCLD. And what I got from that first interaction was that USAID is changing direction to ensure that there is going to be a much more direct intervention and partnership at local, national levels with local NGOs. Prior to this, what I understand is that there are some specific IGNO and other organizations that specifically consistently partner with USAID. Now, with the presentation today, how is that bridging and reaching to the local NGOs in different nations going to be integrated, or can really tap directly into the great resources and facility that USAID is offering with this new direction? What are the specific, are there some specific actions that USAID is going to promote at national levels to get more, or maybe as much as possible, local NGOs participate in the resources that USAID is pouring to the world?
Thank you, Paul. And we also will take the comment from Mama Soroku and then come back to the USAID team, if that's okay. Yeah. Please unmute and speak. I hope I didn't mess up your name. I'm reading it as Mama Soroku, but Do you want to speak? While we figure that out, Arjun, Colleen, Tom, anybody wants to respond to Paul?
Sure, happy to. Paul, I think that's a great question. It's a tough question. There's a couple of different things I would highlight. I would say that USAID does want to make that turn broader than the capacity strengthening policy. I think the administrator power really is focused on communities, actually, but that it is very difficult for USAID. Like the constraints we face in terms of the number of people we have to work on within the mission is actually pretty difficult because, you know, like everyone was saying here on this call, if you want to do this work in a genuine fashion, you do need to be able to engage with local NGOs, with communities. You be able to talk to them. You need to leave the embassy and go, which means you're not spending time doing your memos. You got to spend more time on your memos. Okay, there's a lot of them. There's so many memos. If I did a count of the number of memos just to let us write this policy, it would definitely be over 15 memos for this policy, but I don't know if it's over 25. That sounds crazy, and I am being a little bit, you know, facetious, but it does mean that staff spend their time perhaps on paperwork that they would prefer to spend their time engaging with local actors, local organizations, local communities. I think with respect to both this policy and that pivot, the other thing to remember is USAID's timelines. So if you would, anything that someone is working on now, you might start seeing like actionable things happening, like real actions and real potential resources in about 2 years. So I expect there to be a number of solicitations that talk about the capacity strengthening policy, and I hope we're able to influence those to be shaped a little differently and targeted a little differently, but I wouldn't expect those to come out for another year, at least. And because of just the pace at which a government bureaucracy sort of moves. And so I think those are two key considerations. In terms of like immediate actions, one of the things we work on at the NPI team is supporting missions to change the way they think about outreach. So if you do a pre-solicitation conference, but all you did to advertise it was email like the network you already know, that was sort of a waste. You really need to have an approach, a strategy, a marketing plan to let organizations you don't work with know that you want to have a conversation, that you have something to share, that you'd like to do something together. And so you have to have an actual plan for that. And we spend a lot of time working with missions on building those kinds of plans. And some missions are really committed to it and do it really well, and other missions don't. And that's for whatever reason. Other questions?
There was something in the chat from Cyril, which I think was related in some ways, and that is about how can small local NGOs access USAID funding? You did say
Can you
ask
say that
anything.
again?
Can I add to that question?
Yeah,
I think your point, Arjun, is so important because it's a lot of times it's about the relationship development between the USAID actors in country and the domestic NGOs. So I think that domestic NGOs are asking also, how can I begin to develop a relationship with the USAID staff and missions, and any specific advice? I mean, participating in networks that are connected to the missions is one thing. We had an event this morning with USAID Kenya and regional work there. But I think it would be great to get any advice you have about how to maybe do that relationship development or see the relationship.
Alcohol usually helps. It's tricky because it really depends. USAID is such a castle. They have to open the first door, and then you have an opportunity to build on that, right? But if a mission hasn't created a space where a chapter or a member can interact, you can't. There's nothing to build on, so it's a little bit on us. I will. Colleen, did you want to respond to that one?
I just had something to add that's a bit more bureaucratic than alcohol, which is, you know, I think that a lot of missions are increasingly using things like industry days and requests for information to try to hear more from local actors and sort of understand and expand their understanding of the systems out there. I think that a lot of these opportunities might not seem like they're necessarily worthy of your time and input because they are not necessarily tied to funding opportunities. However, these are the ways that you get on missions radar, that they do become aware of you and that they are able to share opportunities when they arise. And so I think that these are some opportunities to look for and participate in as they arise. And they'll be happening, they happen at mission individual levels. So they're the kinds of things that would be announced by the mission on their website for their country, on their Facebook page. It's not coming out of Washington. It's really coming out of each mission at an individual level.
Colleen, that's a great point. Before we turn over, I see some more hands up. I did want to just flag, because I saw, Cyril's question, this question, that, we are working with Gunjan on USAID is working with Gunjan on having 2 more events here with MCLD. One is more like the workshop you all did for the policy, and that I believe will be the week of November 21st. But like right before Thanksgiving. The other one is to have my colleague Matt Johnson come and do a work with USAID presentation, and he does that a lot. He's very good. And questions about how exactly can an organization get connected with USAID? How can smaller organizations try to access funds? He spends a lot of his time working on exactly that issue. So I'm really glad that Gunjan was able to ask him to come and do that presentation because he's better positioned to answer those questions than Colleen or I. And there were a couple of hands up, which I'll turn it maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Arjun. Just want to very quickly, and we do have to wind up now in a couple of minutes, so Chad and Sotan, I'll ask you to come in very quickly. Before that, just to add to what Arjun said, so look out for us, after the session that we had, I think it was last month, where we had another team from USAID come and talk about their approach to localization and locally led development and about translating administrative powers commitments into action. We did hear from a lot of members about what would this entail? How can we just demystifying USAID, if you will, because it does seem, if you are not engaged with it day to day, if you haven't received grants, if you haven't been part of a process, it just seemed like a very, very, it's like a black box that you can't understand. So we are in the process of that. Matt has offered to do these sessions, not just in English, but in multiple regional languages with the teams so that we can make it region specific. So please look out for information on that. We will be sending that across. And with that, Chad, very quickly, if you can come in a minute, and then Sotan after that. Chad, do you want to unmute? Sotan, do you want to unmute and come in?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll be quick. This will not be a comment. This will be a comment. Just a collective experiential sharing of working with USAID, especially as CSOs. It's scary to work with USAID, and grants or a partnership can actually break a CSO, make them fail, because it's like you're employed for a job at USAID and everything else stops in your life, just to focus on that. I hope that with this localization, we have mutual accountability that the USAID system should not override existing institutions. And if we intentionally create a mutual accountable environment where the USAID system or the local USAID officers are nurturing, helping people grow out of that fear. So in your organization agenda, we hope that there is accommodation and nurturing other than the policing that scares everyone. Big organizations survive that, but small organizations break because the system requires so much and everything else stops and surrounds, as you said. Yeah. It's like you're employed. So I hope that the conversation really goes to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sotin. That is a very important point, and something we do keep hearing from CSOs. Chad, I see you're back. So if you want to very quickly come in, and then I know I need to hand it over to John.
Yeah, I don't know how well this was covered earlier on, but along with this kind of localization strategy that's been rolled out, sorry, a lot of the barrier to getting USAID funding or managing USAID funding is the huge amounts that they come in, the giant like $1 million programs that come in, and the consortiums that you have to join and all that technical detail. And for a lot of NGOs, that one program might be kind of daunting to get in touch with. Is there a part of this policy that's going to maybe offer smaller grants depending on certain countries? Are you kind of looking at the funding mechanism in a different way, like as opposed to just a $2 million block all at once, or is this something that is on the table and being discussed?
The constraints on that, Chad, are larger than you realize, because Congress tells us spend $50 million in this country on water, all right? And then they tell us that, but the money doesn't actually arrive for a year. Now it expires 12 months from then. So you need to move that money out the door as fast as possible. And that is tough. And then in those cases where you haven't moved the money out the door, your boss and their boss and their boss are saying, why is there so much pipeline? Why isn't this money gone out the door? $2 million is around the smallest that we do. It's not globally. Certainly there are plenty of awards that are smaller, but in terms of direct funding, as opposed to via a sub partnership of some kind, like some sub grant, the smaller ones, and the reason is that in order to issue something 250,000 or bigger, and do a grant, it takes the exact same amount of work and sometimes more work, depending on the organization, than putting out 50 million. Okay, 39.9, and there's one extra piece of paper you have to do over 40 million. And even that's like not that bad. And people just are overworked. So, however, there is work happening inside, in fact, in Washington, on why is that the case, and can we do something about it? Can we make it so that the agency is capable of issuing smaller grants without the same exact level of effort and the same amount of paperwork as these huge dollar things? And that's the first step, is figuring out how bureaucratically to make it easier for people to do those grants at all. And that work is underway. But before that's even feasible, I don't know that you'll see any movement. First, we have to figure out, talk to the OMB, and can we change something in the CFR? Can we make it so we can issue simplified grants easier? It's really deeply painful and boring.
Thanks, Arjun, and thanks, Colleen, Tom, and Omar, and thank you everyone for your questions and comments. We will continue this engagement with USAID. As Arjun said, we have a couple of more events coming on in this bid to demystify USAID, but also to see How is it possible? What kind of partnership is possible when you are a local civil society organization or a community-based organization in Northeast Nigeria or in Benin or in Uganda? How can you work with a behemoth like USAID, and what would it mean? So thank you, everyone. And with that, John, I'm going to hand it over to you. I do want to give Colleen and Arjun one last minute, John, if they have anything they want to say in finishing up and closing, and then to you.
Colleen?
I just wanted to say thank you, because this has been a really useful process for me to be able to participate in and hear feedback from you all, and then to actually use that to make changes to the policy. It has probably been the most interesting thing I've worked on this year. And I really appreciate all of your insights and expertise and what you have shared, and my sincere hope and what I have written in all of my guidance for the people carrying the torch with implementation is that they'll continue this consultative process and really be able to take insights like what you've all shared today into that as well. Over to you, Arjun.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to second that. I want to thank all of you, and I want to highlight that this relationship and your feedback has been incredibly valuable and has literally changed the shape of a policy we hope will guide USAID for about a decade. It's mandatory that it guides the agency for 5 years. We'll see if we can have it guide the agency for longer than that. And I also want to just reiterate that this is some of the best work that I've had an opportunity to do. I know for Colleen has reporting, is in reporting season, so her days are painful. And I sit around in a lot of meetings with talking about really boring things. So it is always a pleasure to be here and talk to people doing real work and who are on the ground. And I hope that I'll be back sometime soon.
Okay, well, Arjun, Colleen, thank you very much, and Tom and Umar. We really appreciate your time and effort and your commitment to this. And we will, as a movement, we will do everything we can to facilitate it. Maybe we can find some great big local partners that you've never met that could handle those multi-million-dollar grants and throughout community-based organizations. We will do what we can. I wanted to share some upcoming events. So somebody here on this call, I hope, and it's not me, is going to be at the big climate conference in Egypt soon, 6th to the 18th, COP27. We're eager to get feedback on that because community-led climate adaptation is on the agenda, and we hope that it's a big deal. Similarly, in November, there's the American Evaluation Association. Gunjan, did you want to say something about that?
Sure, I can very quickly actually take up a couple of these things and just mention everyone together in the interest of time. So we are at the American Evaluation Association has an annual conference. I know a lot of people here obviously have nothing to do with it, but for those of you who are there, or if your organizations are there, then please reach out and let us know if you are involved in sessions, if you are hosting anything. Again, let us know. We would love to spread the word, especially if it's about CLD. MCLD is there. We have a professional development workshop as well as 3 sessions, one of them with USAID and Colleen actually. So we definitely there. And if you have sessions, let us know, we'll put them out. I also wanted to quickly mention that the Unlearning Labs that we started earlier this month as an experiment on mutual capacity strengthening and as a learning space to see how instead of traditional ways of capacity strengthening, we can use proximate resources and networks and learn from each other is, we launched it earlier this month. The second part will happen in November. And this particular Unlearning Lab session is on strategic planning. So for those of you who were there for the first session, or if you were not there, we will still be sending out information around the dates. We have Sotan Ziba from Malawi and Sophie Kange from Uganda leading those Unlearning Labs for us on strategic planning. We will, in the week of November 21st, date to be confirmed, have this workshop that Arjun mentioned briefly with USAID. And that workshop is again looking at, well, how do you think USAID can measure or think about, like how will we know if they have delivered on the commitments made by administrative power? What is the kind of change that we are looking at? And how would that change be measured? So the team is planning to reach out and speak to local organizations to get a sense of, well, what would progress look like for them? So we will again send out more information on this going forward. And the last thing I want to flag on this is the Women Deliver Kigali, which is next year, which seems really far away. We are putting a proposal together on women's, how much of community-led development, locally led development relies on women's leadership and unpaid free labor, and how much burden it places on them and what it requires of women. If this is something you are interested in, if you are going to be in Kigali or somebody from your team is, please reach out to us immediately. I'm going to put our email ID in the chat. We are going to put in the proposal end of this week. So if you're there and would like to be on the panel, please let us know. John, back to you.
Great, thanks so much, Gunjan, and thanks all of you for joining, and a special big vote of thanks to Dr. Paul Marie Husu, who provided our translation. We really, really prefer human translation to machine translation. So thank you so much for being with us. And the last thing on that list is that our December 14th call will be a very special year-end call. We're not going to do it the last Wednesday, but the second Wednesday of the month, so that the holiday season is clear of our meetings. So you'll be receiving invitations to those meetings. But meanwhile, thank you very, very much for your participation, and we'll look forward to seeing you on all these future events. So with that, I think anyone who wants to yell goodbye to everybody can unmute and say goodbye to everybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Au revoir. Bye bye.
Bye.
Merci pour le
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Bye. Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Good to see you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Pascal, merci.
Merci, Alassane. Paul, merci. Ouais. Merci à vous tous.
Okay, I am going to end the call. Thank you, everyone.